Welcome to this Ready to Craft. In this video, I will show you how to create this shabby chic Valentine's Day decorations using Readi-Board. To begin, I've already divided my sheet of Readi-Board in half. I'm drawing myself a border all the way around the piece. This is just to help me make sure that I get complete paint coverage. While I was getting my paints, I noticed that I had this pretty pink metallic. So I'm going to divide my other half of foam board so that I can use this color as well. I only plan on using the metallic as an accent, so I don't need a very large piece. Moving back to my first half, I have all of my paints out and ready. I'm going to spray a light layer of water onto my foam board to begin. This will just help the paints blend a little easier. Now I'm going to apply my paints from lightest to darkest, and working back and forth between the colors. This will help blend them and make a nice even gradient. Once I'm happy with it, I will set aside that piece to dry. Moving on to my metallic piece, I'm going to first apply a flat pink layer. This will allow me to use less metallic paint and get a better color. Because this layer is going underneath the metallic paint, I don't mind if some of the other colors get mixed in. Once that's dry, I can add my metallic. It took 3 layers of metallic paint to get to the coverage that I liked. While that is drying, we can move on to the wood grain. First, I'm going to distress my board. I'm kind of just using whatever I have laying around for this. For my base layers, I'm using a wax paint and a sponge. I will add some links to a couple tutorial videos that go into greater detail on how to achieve this look. I allowed this first layer of paint to dry, then added a second coat, making sure I get the paint into all of the distressed marks that we made. Allow that to dry. Finally, using a coarse-haired brush and a very light touch, I'm going to add some darker areas. I've thinned down my paint quite a bit as well. When you return to your gradient piece, you may have something that looks like this. Don't worry, there's an easy fix. Simply spray the entire back with water. I like to go over it with a brush after just to make sure I'm getting even coverage. And then place something over the top to weigh it down. After a few minutes, you can see it's already flattened quite a bit. But we're going to give it a little bit more help. I'm going to use a couple heavy objects to weigh the board down. Allow that to dry completely. Now, I'm going to divide the piece into strips. Split your wood grain and your metallic pieces into strips as well. For the wood grain, I went a little bit larger than my gradient pieces, and for the metallic, I went smaller. But that's just my personal preference. Do whatever you think looks best. To cover my edges, I tested out a sea sponge and a regular sponge like we used for the wood grain. I found that the end effect was pretty similar, but the regular sponge seemed to give me a better, faster coverage. For these metallic pieces, I'm using a dark gray for the edges. This makes it look like the paint has chipped off the edges. And using a small coarse brush and a silver metallic paint, I'll add more detail. You can see I'm being very sparse and light with this silver. Using the same technique, I'm using a dark brown to cover the edges of my wood pieces. Here, I'm testing one of the scrap pieces from my gradient. It turned out how I expected. So I'm going to use this brown paint on all of the edges of my gradient. Here, I am cutting the supports that are going to be glued to the back of my project. I suggest cutting at least 6. I have my gradient strips laid out, as well as my wood and my metallic. Now I'm going to begin arranging them. There's not a particular formula to this, I'm just playing around and seeing what looks best. I've turned my 2 piles to make one long strip. I decided to have the red in the center, but you could have the light pink in the center if you prefer. And now, flip all the pieces over. First, I'm going to use my ruler to nudge the pieces and try to get them centered. Then, I will use my ruler as a weight to keep them in place while I glue on the supports. You can see here that I'm only adding 2 supports, one to the top area and one to the bottom. I actually recommend doing at least 3, but you're probably better off doing 4, and I'll show you why in a moment. Later on, when it came time to cutting my shapes, you can see that the black strips didn't actually support my entire shape. So I had to go back in after the fact and add more supports. While the support strips are drying, I'm going to cut out my template. I used a piece of foam board to make my template. But if you prefer, you could print out 2 copies of the template and then attach them together using the dotted line. I'm using Repositionable Spray Adhesive to keep the template in place while I work. You could also use reverse cement for this. I'll cut out 1/2 of the letter, and then flip and position my template to cut out the other half. I'm using a little bit of masking tape to mark my center. This isn't necessary, but it helps me in the process. I'm using a red marker to trace my template. It shows up well enough that I can see the letters, but if some of the marks happen to stay on my project, they won't stand out too much. Trace your letters in the order that you plan on displaying them. To make cutting a little easier, I'm going to divide my project in half. I prefer to use my ruler as a straight edge wherever possible when making cuts. You may need to make multiple passes on the same line. Once your shapes are cut out, we can paint the edges again. Once again, I'm using the same brown and the same sponge. You may need to use a paintbrush to get into these smaller areas. You can see I have a little bit of paper peeling up on the corner here. It's not a big deal, I'm just going to use some paint to stick it back down. You can see I'm generally trying to avoid using brown on the strips that are supposed to be metal. Using my coarse brush, I'm getting into any of the cracks and adding a little bit of extra distressing on the edges. I'm using a paintbrush to go in with my gray paint and paint the edges of my metal strips. Finally, using that same silver that I did earlier, I'm going to use the back end of a paintbrush and add a couple little dots here and there. This gives the illusion of nails or tacks. Once those are all dry, you're ready to hang and display. We just love the distressed look of these decorations. If you try this craft out, we'd love to see it. Our social media links can be found in the description. Don't forget to like and subscribe. If there's a foam board craft that you would like to see a ready to craft of, let us know in the comments.